If reviewing one NBME takes you 8 hours, the problem is not that you are lazy. It is also not that you are bad at reviewing. The problem is that most students review NBMEs the same way they review a normal question block. They open the explanation, they read every answer choice, they write notes, they make and key cards, they chase every fact they forgot. Then, 6 hours later, they are exhausted, they barely remember what they reviewed, and they still do not know why their score is stuck. That is not review. That is just restudying with extra anxiety. In this video, I'm going to show you how to review an NBME without wasting your entire day. More importantly, I'll show you how to leave the review with something useful. Not just more notes, but a clear diagnosis of why you missed questions and what needs to change on your next block. Because the goal of NBME review is not to understand every explanation. The goal is to find the reason your score is not moving. Here's the reason NBME review becomes an 8-hour disaster. Most students treat every question as equally important. They treat every miss like a content gap. But forgetting one fact is not the same as misreading the stem, ignoring the age, falling for the distractor, or second-guessing yourself out of the right answer. And if you review them the same way, you will waste time. A content gap needs a small content fix, while a reasoning error needs a reasoning fix. A pattern recognition miss needs a comparison, and a second-guessing miss needs a behavioral rule. And finally, a careless stem reading error needs a process change. But most students do this instead. They miss a question. They read the whole explanation and think, okay, I understand it now, and then they move on. But "I understand it now" is not enough. That's by far the biggest trap in NBME review. Because understanding the explanation after the fact does not prove you know how to avoid the same miss under timed conditions. When you review an NBME, your job is not to turn the NBME into a textbook. Your job is to answer one question: what caused the miss? Not just what was the diagnosis or what fact did I forget, but what actually happened between reading the question and choosing the answer. There are only a few possibilities. Either you did not know the content, or you knew the content but failed to recognize the presentation. You narrowed it down to two and picked the distractor, the dreaded 50-50 trap. You ignored a pivot clue in the stem, or changed your answer away from the correct choice. You overvalued one finding and undervalued another, or you panicked because the question looked unfamiliar, or you simply ran out of time and chose too quickly. Those are different misses, so they need different fixes. This is why a student can do 2,000 questions and still plateau. They are increasing exposure, but not changing the mechanism that produces the wrong answer. At MDSteps, we describe this exact student as someone who does not need more question volume, but a structural shift in test-taking mechanics. Here is the system I recommend. You do not review the NBME once. You review it in 3 passes. Pass 1 is the map. Pass 2 is the diagnosis, and pass 3 is the rule. That is it. Map, diagnose, rule. No more, no less. The reason this works is that it prevents you from falling into the explanation rabbit hole too early. Most students start with the explanation. That is backwards. Before you read the full explanation, you need to decide what you are trying to learn from that question. In Pass 1, you are not deeply reviewing anything yet. You are simply mapping what happened. Go through the NBME and mark each question into one of 4 categories. Category 1 is what I call clean and correct. You knew it, you answered it confidently, and you would answer it correctly again. Do not spend time here. Category 2, what I call uncertain correct. You got it right, but you guessed, narrowed it down to 2, or were not sure why the answer was right. These matter. Category 3 is where things start to get interesting. This category is the simple content miss. You missed it because you genuinely did not know the fact, association, mechanism, drug, bug, enzyme, screening guideline, or classic presentation. These are usually fast to fix. Category 4 is the most important of them all, the reasoning miss. This is the big one. You knew enough to get the question right, but your process failed. You picked the distracto or changed your answer. You might have ignored a clue or over-focused on a buzzword. Bottom line is, you knew the disease, but missed what the question was actually asking. These are the questions that deserve your deepest review. Clean correct? Skip it. It's wasted effort. Uncertain correct? Run a quick review and move on. Content miss? Patch the hole and rebuild your foundation. Reasoning miss? This requires deep review, which we'll get into a little later. This first pass should be fast. For a full NBME, this should take about 20 to 30 minutes. You are not writing paragraphs. You are not making and key cards. You are not opening 3 textbooks. You are just sorting. The mistake is trying to deeply review everything before you know what deserves depth. Now you go deeper, but only on the questions that matter. Start with incorrects, uncertain corrects, and any question where you changed your answer. For each one, write one sentence. I missed this because. That sentence is the whole point of the review, not a paragraph, not a rewritten explanation, just one sentence. For example, I missed this because I saw chest pain and jumped to MI, but ignored the pleuritic quality and recent surgery. Or, I missed this because I knew the diagnosis, but answered the treatment for the wrong disease stage. Or, I missed this because I narrowed it to 2 and chose the answer that matched the buzzword, not the answer that matched the full timeline. Or, I missed this because I changed away from the right answer after overthinking one lab value. That sentence is more valuable than a page of notes, because that sentence tells you what failed. Now, when you review each missed question, I want you to identify 3 things. The first is the pivot clue. This is the piece of information in the stem that should have changed your decision. Not every clue, not the whole stem, the one clue that should have made the correct answer more likely than the distractor. The second is the distractor trap. Why was the wrong answer tempting? What did it match? A buzzword? A common association? A partial symptom? A disease you were expecting, or a previous question pattern? The third is the takeaway rule. What rule will you carry into the next block? Not review cardiology. That is too broad. A real rule sounds like this. When a question gives me a classic diagnosis but asks for the next step, I need to identify stability before choosing treatment. Or, when I narrow it to 2, I will choose the answer that explains the timeline, not the answer that matches one isolated clue. Or, if I wanted to change my answer, I need a specific stem clue that disproves my first answer. Anxiety is not evidence. That is NBME review. Pivot clue, distractor trap, takeaway rule. MDSteps is built around this exact style of clinical reasoning review. Isolating pivot clues, distractor logic, how to commit, and how the clue confirms the diagnosis. Let's make this practical. Instead of talking about the review process in the abstract, let's use an original NBME style practice question and walk through what good review actually looks like. A 58-year-old woman comes to the emergency department because of sudden shortness of breath and chest pain for 2 hours. The pain is worse with deep inspiration. 5 days ago, she underwent total knee replacement surgery. Her temperature is 37.1 degrees Celsius, blood pressure is 128/76 millimeters of mercury, pulse is 118 per minute, respirations are 24 per minute, and oxygen saturation is 89% on room air. Examination shows clear lungs and no lower extremity edema. ECG shows sinus tachycardia. Which of the following is the most likely diagnosis? Your answer choices are A. Acute myocardial infarction, B. Pneumonia, C. Pulmonary embolism, D. Pneumothorax, and E. Unstable angina. Now let's say you do what a lot of students do. You narrow it down to 2, myocardial infarction or pulmonary embolism. And then you pick myocardial infarction. Why? Because you saw chest pain, it felt dangerous, and you panicked a little. Then you read the explanation and think, Oh, okay, it was pulmonary embolism. That makes sense. But that is not enough. That is exactly where bad review stops and good review begins. The real question is not, what was the diagnosis? The real question is, why did I not choose pulmonary embolism under pressure? A useful review sentence might be, I missed this because I anchored on chest pain and ignored the risk factor and pain quality. That is already much more useful than just saying, I forgot PE. Now ask, what was the pivot clue? The pivot clue was recent surgery plus pleuritic chest pain plus tachycardia and hypoxemia. That cluster should have pushed you away from MI and toward PE. Ask yourself, why was the wrong answer tempting? MI was tempting because chest pain is common, chest pain is high yield and feels dangerous, and under pressure, students often overreact to the broad complaint. So the distractor worked because it matched the headline symptom, but not the full clinical picture. That is a very different insight from simply memorizing the correct diagnosis. Now write the rule you want to carry into the next block. Something like, when chest pain appears, I will not commit to the most common dangerous diagnosis until I check pain quality, risk factors, and associated vitals. That is useful. That is actionable. That actually changes future performance. Now compare that with what many students write instead. Something like, pulmonary embolism presents with dyspnea, pleuritic chest pain, tachycardia, and hypoxemia. Risk factors include surgery, immobility, malignancy, and pregnancy. That note is not wrong, but it does not fix the miss, because the problem was not that you had never heard of pulmonary embolism. The problem was that you failed to prioritize the clue that separated PE from the distractor. That is why reviewing explanations can feel productive without actually moving your score. You understood the explanation, but you did not change your selection process. After you review the key misses, you need to stop. This is where a lot of students lose another 2 hours, because they keep digging. They look up every related topic. Then they make 10 cards from one question. Then they watch a video. Then they open first aid. They tell themselves they are being thorough, but at some point, thorough becomes avoidance. You've gone down the rabbit hole of over-preparing, and really all it did was kill a few hours and exhaust you. The final pass is where you convert the review into a small list of next block rules. You should leave your NBME review with maybe 5 to 10 rules, not 50, just 5 to 10. Here are some examples. I will not change an answer unless I can point to a specific clue I missed. I will identify what the question is asking before looking at the answer choices. When two answers both seem possible, I will ask which one explains the most clues, not which one is more familiar. If the question asks next best step, I will check stability first. If I miss a question because of content, I will make one targeted card, not rewrite the topic. If I get a question right but guessed, I will review it briefly because guessed correct questions can hide future misses. These rules are what you test on your next block. The point of an NBME is not just to give you a score. The point is to generate the rules that raise your next score. Your review is not done until you have rules for the next block. Now let's talk about what you should not review. Do not deeply review every correct question. If you were confident, fast, and correct, move on. Do not read every answer explanation with the same intensity. Wrong answer explanations are useful only if they explain a distractor you were actually considering. If you were never going to pick that option, do not spend 5 minutes memorizing why it is wrong. Do not turn every missed question into a content project. Some questions deserve one targeted fact, some deserve a reasoning rule, and some deserve nothing more than, I rushed and misread the last sentence. Do not make huge Anki decks from one NBME. A good NBME review produces a small number of high-quality cards and a larger number of behavioral insights. And do not spend the rest of the day punishing yourself because your score was lower than you wanted. That does not help. The score is data. The review is where you turn the data into a plan. Here is a realistic time structure. After your MBME, take a break. Do not immediately start reviewing while emotionally destroyed. Then do this. First 20 to 30 minutes, map the exam. Sort questions into clean correct, uncertain correct, content miss, and reasoning miss. Next 60 to 90 minutes, review the high value questions. That means incorrects, guessed corrects, answer changes, and two choice misses. For each one, write, why did I miss it? What was the pivot clue? Why was my wrong answer tempting? And most importantly, what rule do I need next time? Final 20 to 30 minutes. Build your next block rules. Pick the 5 to 10 rules that would have saved the most points. That is the review. For most students, that is enough. If you need more content review, schedule that separately. Do not let NBME review become an uncontrolled 8-hour spiral. The highest value questions to review are not always the ones where you had no idea. They are often the ones where you narrowed it down to 2, because those questions reveal your test-taking mechanics. When you narrow it to 2 and pick the wrong one, that usually means your knowledge was close enough. You were in the right neighborhood, but something in your decision process failed. Maybe you chose the more familiar disease. Maybe you chose the answer with the buzzword. Maybe you ignored the time course. Maybe you answered the question you expected instead of the question they asked. Maybe you overweighted one lab and underweighted the clinical picture. That is where score jumps come from, not from rereading everything, from identifying the repeated two-choice trap that keeps costing you points. This is one of the main reasons MDSteps focuses so heavily on reasoning diagnostics instead of just raw percentages. There are times when a longer review is appropriate. If you missed multiple questions from the same content area, you may need a focused content session. For example, if you missed 3 renal tubular acidosis questions, do a dedicated RTA review. If you missed multiple biostatistics questions, do a biostats block. If you missed several ethics questions because you did not know the framework, review the framework. But notice the difference. That is not NBME review anymore. That is targeted content repair. You should separate those. NBME review answers, what went wrong? Content repair answers, what do I need to relearn? When you mix them together, your review becomes endless. So during NBME review, just mark it, content repair needed, renal acid base. Then schedule that later. Do not let one missed question hijack the whole day. Sorry, I know this video ran a little long, so here is the simple version. Do not review an NBME by reading everything. Review it by finding what failed. Map the questions. Diagnose the misses. Build the rules. Spend less time on clean corrects. Spend more time on uncertain corrects, answer changes, and two-choice misses. And for every important miss, ask, what clue did I ignore? Why did the wrong answer tempt me? And finally, what rule would prevent this next time? That is how you review an NBME without wasting 8 hours. And more importantly, that is how you turn an NBME from a score report into a score improvement tool. If you want to see what this looks like on an actual question, I'll link a free MDSteps breakdown below. You can answer a few questions and see a reasoning review customized to the answer you picked. That is designed to show the difference between simply reading an explanation and actually diagnosing the miss. And remember, you do not need to review longer. You need to review cleaner.